Parents, has anyone ever tried to kidnap your child? A woman kidnapped my child and accused my husband of being the kidnapper. One day, my husband and I were at the supermarket, and our baby was being especially fussy, so he took her for a quick drive. The motion usually calms her down. It only took about 10 minutes to settle her, and I was still in the store, so he pulled back into the parking lot to wait for me. It was an unseasonably nice day, so he took her, in her car seat, to sit on one of the benches outside the store. He took a business call and had just sat them down, absent-mindedly rocking the carrier, when a woman approached them. It's not uncommon for people to ask to play with our baby. She's got big rosy cheeks, soft wisps of gold hair, and the most adorable churchly toothless grin, especially when she's deep into a good nap. But her nap schedule is paramount, so my husband was preparing to tell the woman she actually couldn't play with our baby right then. She walked over, right in their direction, brimming with nonchalant confidence, and before he could even finish his sentence, explaining she was napping and not to be touched, she picked up the carrier and started walking off. He was in shock for a minute, not fully believing someone would be ballsy enough to do something so sinister in plain daylight. So he said, "Excuse me," put her down, as panic mounted. She remained calm this entire time, but when he called after her, she started walking away more briskly than when she'd approached. He ran full speed ahead, tried to grapple the carrier out of her hands, finally resulting in restraining her arms. This woman yelled, "Help! He's trying to take my baby. Kidnapping. 911. Help!" while kicking him in the shin and pulling a pink bottle of pepper spray out of her handbag. Of course, no one in the parking lot was clocking the earlier interaction and assumed he really was a kidnapper, a lone man in a Deadpool t-shirt versus a tiny, well-dressed woman. A man knocked my husband to the ground and held him down. He could hear bystanders encouraging the woman to file a police report, but she was doing a very convincing job of acting shaken up and insisting she just wanted to get home. To make matters worse for my husband, she was driving a minivan. He was in a raw state of panic, realizing the entire parking lot had banded together to inadvertently facilitate the kidnapping of our daughter. He was begging and pleading with them, but no one was listening. They just kept screaming at him that the jig was up and he needed to lie still and wait for police and stop terrorizing a young mother. My husband finally had the novel idea to show them family pictures on his phone, but too panicked to think clearly, this manifested as him shouting, "I have pictures of the baby on my phone," which, of course, everyone interpreted as him having either stalking photos or worse, explicit images of the baby. It was at this point that a man kicked my husband as hard as he could in the ribs. It was at this point I had exited the store and thought he was being robbed by these people. I was yelling for security, so panicked, my chest constricted, and I could barely get any sound out. It was only then I realized he did not have our baby with him. When I saw she was being held by a woman, I was relieved. I thought maybe the woman had intervened to move my daughter out of harm's way while my husband was being robbed and was walking away to get help. I couldn't find a security guard outside the store, so I ran up to the people holding my husband down, waving my wallet, pleading, "Take everything you want, just let up and leave us alone." And one of the men holding him down said, "Lady, we need to wait for police to deal with him." I was so confused. Why would the muggers have called the police? I just kept stammering, "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" and made out someone saying he tried to abduct that woman's kid. I did not understand and was sure I'd misheard him. My husband would never hurt a child, and we have 4 kids. If he was going to commit a crime, bringing home another kid would be at the bottom of his list. I kept trying to understand what the man was saying, and suddenly it all clicked. I looked around for the woman who had the baby carrier, and she was halfway across the parking lot. I went into total ballistic tiger cub mode, literally left out of my heels, and sprinted across the parking lot. I'm not a UFC fighter. I've never even taken a self-defense class, so all I could think to do was grab the woman by her hair and squeeze her throat with my other hand. Amazingly, none of the other bystanders had yet to connect that my husband was telling the truth, and this woman was absconding with my baby. I yanked on her hair as hard as I could, and that was enough to make her drop the carrier. I was so scared and surprised that I actually just threw myself on top of the carrier, covering the entire thing like a blanket, and stayed that way without saying anything else. The woman left. Not one person tried to stop her, even though she was clearly leaving without the child she claimed was hers, which would be pretty incriminating. If I'd watched the scene unfold within the next couple of minutes, police had arrived. After all that, there were still several bystanders who explained it as my husband trying to kidnap the baby. The police, to my horror, assumed that she must not have had bad intentions. The first questions they asked me, after getting her description, weren't investigative. They were questions trying to convince me not to pursue charges, still placing blame on my husband. They spent more time verifying that the baby was actually mine, and they concerned themselves with the fact that the baby was not actually hers. My husband had called his brother at that point, who works in an office with a lot of lawyers, and connected with one who gave us the priceless advice to get every officer's name and badge number, to request copies of the store's security tapes right away, and to escalate our complaint higher up the chain if these officers weren't taking us seriously. Finally, we had reason enough to believe we were being taken seriously, and we went home, just shook, and cried until we had to get our other kids from school. My husband was eating with rage and grappling with a feeling of helplessness from how little he was able to do, and had 2 cracked ribs from when the man kicked him. Amazingly and frustratingly, there were still people who stuck around to talk to police who were giving my husband dirty looks, and one man who even implored the police to involve CPS to verify it was really our baby. Parking lot kidnapper, you better hope we don't meet again. We were both shaken and couldn't believe what had just happened. We kept replaying the events in our minds, wondering how something so sinister could occur in broad daylight. The police eventually took statements from us and reviewed the security footage, which clearly showed the woman's attempted kidnapping. However, they still seemed hesitant to take action, and we couldn't understand why. It wasn't until we escalated the complaint to a higher authority that the police finally started taking us seriously. They apologized for the misunderstanding and assured us that they would do everything in their power to catch the woman and bring her to justice. The days that followed were a blur of police interviews, medical checkups for my husband's injuries, and trying to process the trauma we had just experienced. We were grateful that our baby was safe, but we couldn't shake off the feeling of vulnerability and anger. As we looked back on the incident, we realized that the bystanders' quick judgment and failure to listen to my husband's pleas for help had almost cost us our child. We hoped that our story would serve as a cautionary tale, reminding people to always listen to both sides of the story before jumping to conclusions. The woman was eventually caught and charged with attempted kidnapping. We were relieved that justice was being served, but the experience had left a lasting impact on us. We were more cautious and aware of our surroundings, but we also knew that we couldn't let fear dictate our lives. We had to keep moving forward, always vigilant, but never letting the evil actions of one person define us.